Zoom to try to get this as good, close as possible to what David would do if he were here. But we'll be ready to start. You think this is as good as we've got?
I think so.
Okay.
And do we want to record this? Did David tell you how to?
David said he would have it on record or something like that.
Automatic record? Okay.
Yes, yep.
Good.
So,
Here's our chairman.
so I'm Richard Mengy, the chair of the planning board. Welcome to folks who are watching this on Zoom. This is the second of 4 planning board meetings where we will be talking to various participants throughout the state as it relates to housing. Tonight, at our last meeting, we had a visit with Renee Thial with the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission, and she talked about the housing needs assessment that was done by the Regional Planning Commission and gave us some background in terms of the regional need for housing and the specific estimates for various communities, including the town of Lyme. Tonight, we have Susan Mcleod from Sandwich, New Hampshire, who is going to be talking to us about some of the activities that Sandwich has performed. And then we have 2 more meetings where we're bringing in some outside speakers. On November 7th, we have what's Mr. Winter's?
Andrew Winter.
Andrew Winter from Twin Pines Housing Trust is going to be in person at our meeting here. And on November 14th, we have Jonah Richard, who is a developer of fairly small housing projects, and from Fairleigh, who is going to talk to us a little bit about his experience and maybe some of the issues and that he has with providing housing. And we also have Margaret Pratt.
Jamie Rogers.
Excuse me, Jamie Rogers from the Margaret Pratt Assisted Living Complex up in Bradford. So without further ado, Nat has talked a little bit with Susan, and I'll let him introduce Susan, and then Susan, we very much appreciate you participating via Zoom with us neophytes here. And so go ahead, Nat.
Yeah, Susan, I'm.
Matt, here.
Oh, there you go.
Does that show you?
It does.
Is that good? Do you wanna put this on near you?
It's perfect.
That's
Okay,
fine,
okay,
that's
okay,
fine.
good. There's Matt.
I'm Nat Niles, I'm the one who's been trading emails with you. I just wanna second what Rich has said about how pleased we are that you could come and talk to us. Susan is the land use secretary for Sandwich, did I get that right?
Yes.
And she's coming, I actually had asked for a planning board member, but I think we're lucky to have Susan because she has done a couple of presentations on this already. And I think is sort of the person who was in the forefront of the HOP or HOP grant application and the monitoring of progress and the public outreach. So I think you probably are the person we really need to hear from, because that's what these are the things that we're interested in. In particular, your experience with the consultants and the HOP grant. So take it away.
Okay,
She share her screen.
can I get this onto a full screen somehow?
Are you going to share your screen? There we go, it's working.
Beautiful.
Perfect.
My-
We can see it.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, this is greater downtown Sandwich, and,
Looks a lot like Lyme.
as we are probably a town very similar in size and, being on the east-west end of the state rather than the north-south arteries that bring all sorts of tourism and other things to this state. When we first began this process, it was also based on the Lakes Region Planning Commission's housing needs assessment. Particularly, they had a somewhat controversial table in there about the fair share, as mentioned in the RSA, about what was projected for the town of Sandwich within the next, say, 20 years, that of 80-something new builds, that at least 30 of them should be affordable housing. And again, in trying to react to the one-size-fits-all that usually comes down from the state, the town really had to look at what the town is and its location and the unique properties of the town to be able to address how we could then look at creating more housing opportunities within our town. So I started drafting the HOP grant application, and we decided to go for phase 2 and 3 first instead of phase 1. Now, the second round of the grant hasn't broken it down quite as clearly. That the first phase was usually to address updating your master plan, and phases 2 and 3. 2 was to do an audit of all your regulations and where the barriers, or what they called barriers to housing opportunities, were in your zoning and your site plan and your subdivision regulations. And then phase 3 was coming out with recommendations of how to address those barriers and make it more feasible to have different types of housing in your town. Let's go on to 2. So I'll talk about this while it shows some of the numbers here for the town. So it's really large in area, but a lot of it is under conservation, is in the White Mountain National Forest, has a lot of wetlands and a lot of steep slopes. So you start taking some of these other components out of what is a feasible place to build. I also compared this where up until recently I was working for the town of Ashland, which again is a town that hovers around a population of 2,000. The difference there being they're right off 93. They have town municipal water and sewer services, and they actually have their own electric department. So, and they're next to Plymouth, which is a larger employment center with its university and hospitals. So to try to say that all smaller towns have to come up with the same solutions is not something you can really do. So for Sandwich, we really looked at where the barrier was, and particularly that 98% of the houses in Sandwich at the moment are all single family. And the zoning for lot size almost doubled if you just went to any multi-structure, which included 2 units and all the way up to 5. And the 2-unit kind of sat in the middle of not being part of the multi-units that a planning board addresses, and at the same time being different from what the requirements were for a single-family home. So that's what we really focused on with the consultant who first did the audit for us and found places in our zoning in particular that really put up barriers to just have 2-family or even new duplexes built anywhere in town without it being twice the size lot, more setbacks and buffers involved. So that is what we decided to focus on. And the first thing we did was an outreach, with a survey to the town, which we got well over 200 responses, and identified where people were thinking with the best places to be able to expand any kind of housing opportunities. And if you go around town, I'll go back to this one, there are a lot of these much older homes, the big house, little house, barn configurations that could easily be converted into family housing that is more than a single family. And the outreach was really important to identify where people viewed their town and the common themes and concerns that were identified through the survey. We did over 40 interviews with the consultant, did a lot of the ones with builders and people in the trades, as it were, and we focused on school staff and realtors and teachers and people who were looking for the type of housing that was scarce in the town. Particularly the fire department, which is aging out, said if you can't get younger people within the call area, we're going to have serious problems when it comes to fires and emergencies and ambulance service. So that's what we really kind of focused on, getting that type of changes in our zoning. And I would think too, you should always go somewhat incrementally. There's no way that you can just throw out all your zoning, whether it's minimum lot sizes or anything else, and expect that, number one, that it would automatically pass in town, and how you're actually going to deal with it down the road. So we took it incrementally and created 10 warrant articles to address all the different ways that we could address getting at least 2-family or duplexes into all the different districts in town. And that passed, I don't know if you can see this, all of those passed either by a margin of 4-1 or at least 2-1, that the town was definitely for somehow creating some more of this kind of housing. And I want to go into, again, dealing with the consultant. It was really important to have that outside look at what you're, like we all know that what happens with all our regulations is they get layered over the years. You keep adding things and you don't necessarily take things out, and you end up with either duplication or some sort of inconsistencies or things that are outdated that you just never go back to address again. So it really helps to have a professional actually read through all your regulations and start pointing out what you really should be addressing to update them. And I found that working with, we ended up with Barrett Consulting Group out of Massachusetts, and Will was very helpful. We had bi-monthly Zoom meetings with him to go over all the things we were working on, and started really working on the outreach, which we did 2 public forums that he helped organize and did a presentation at. And by the time we were getting to the public hearings for actually zoning amendments, a lot of people had talked a lot in town about what this effort was all about. And I can't stress enough that the outreach is really important, that number one, you have to have a planning board who is really on board with the whole effort. Because you not only have to present it, you have to answer the questions reasonably, and you have to sometimes get that thicker skin of there's going to be some opposition and you have to be prepared for it. And the other thing is, it really helped in the town of Sandwich anyway, that the planning board members really got stuck in about reaching out to all their fellow citizens and really talking about this. Going to the weekly senior meals on Wednesday afternoons, and hanging out at the transfer station and talking to people, and going to the local cafe, or going to the library. Wherever it was, you had to really start interfacing and really listening, and it really brought home that your function as a planning board is really important, but it's based on serving your public, and you really have to keep in touch with them. And I think the effort for all the outreach was very, very important, and the consultant was really good about giving us some of the materials to be able to do that. So if you have any questions about how we went about this, it was on a tight schedule. We put in the grant application in May. We got the funding in that August, and we had already embarked on having conversations with Lakes Region community developers and other builders and people in the community that had made the effort originally back in the 80s for the Spokefield Commons elderly housing. Spoke to the sewer commissioners, because the only quote-unquote municipal sewer is a large leach field in the center of town that only serves a certain small portion of the historic district. So we had a lot of looking at what confines where things can happen and the scope of them, but we had to start somewhere, and looking at larger homes that could be subdivided and being able to reduce the lot size for 2-family homes was the first step that really can make a difference. So we'll see how, we can't control the costs of construction, which you're going to hear a lot about anyway. But you have to be able to set the table and then be prepared for if anybody comes to the planning board with plans to do any of these kind of projects, that you really have your regulations in place and you have the mindset that you're going to do your best to encourage whatever you can for your community. So I guess that's my spiel right now. So if you have any questions?
So, yes, first off, this is terrific. This is fabulous information. Thank you, I appreciate it. You talked about the timeline. You put the grant application in May, you got the approval in August. What year was this?
That was 2023, and so our 2024 warrant articles were all prepared by the end of 23. And we really did a push for the forums during the fall and the winter before we ended up having the actual public hearings for those amendments.
Right, so it sounds like your consultant gave you a ton of help to get to get the ordinance written and be ready to go onto the ballot, that has to be finalized by, I don't know, sometime in January. So that's.
Yeah, your public hearings have to be in January, and the final verbiage has to be to your town clerk by the beginning of February.
That's right, yep.
So you have to back that up so that you have something solid or more finalized in December to be able to advertise that this is what we are proposing. So it is a tight timeline. And again, Will Downey out of Barrett Group was very helpful. As I said, we set up that we had regular Zoom meetings with him so that we kept in touch with where he was progressing and what we were doing in the meantime. And it was very helpful. And then he did end up coming to town and driving around to get a flavor of the town he was working with. And by the time we had the forums, he was there to do a slide presentation on the audit that was done and then the recommendations, and could answer a lot of the questions, as well as the planning board, who also had to answer a lot of those local questions about what it really meant for the town.
Okay, I had a couple other questions. How big is Sandwich? How many people are in Sandwich?
The high-end estimate is 1,700.
Okay,
We were hovering more around 14 or 1,500. And then, of course, COVID brought in a big bump in the population. But for the most part, that seemed to be a lot of people taking early retirement and coming to what used to be their seasonal summer homes, winterizing them and then staying. So we didn't get a giant influx of newcomers necessarily.
okay, all right. And then, what about municipal services, water, sewer? I think you said neither.
Neither, yeah,
Okay.
again, the very center of town, which is also the historic district, is serviced by a large leach field, and
Right.
it has a maximum capacity, which it hasn't been met, but it's close enough that they can't add a lot of new building to that particular area of town.
Yeah, okay.
So that has always been a barrier for, again, some of these larger projects. Again, working in Ashland up until August, Lakes Region Community Developers, which is a nonprofit that works for getting affordable housing built and maintained, was proposing a 67-unit project for Ashland. And they could only do that because there's municipal water and sewer.
Okay.
It gets a little dicey after you get to a certain size that then you have to deal with community septic systems.
Yep.
And who owns them, who maintains them, how you deal with all of that.
Susan, I had a question about your interaction with the consultants in coming up with their recommendations, regarding the warrant articles and the, was there a give and take? Did they interview planning board members, or was that part of it? Or was it something of just going back with the ordinance book and going over it and trying to figure out, what the barriers were? How exactly did it work?
Yeah, I think that the consultant on his first cut with the audit found a lot of what he termed, I guess the terminology of the day is barriers to other housing opportunities. So he proposed a lot, and the planning board looked through all of them and kind of prioritized which would be sort of like the easiest to start with and how you can build up to maybe others. Like a lot of towns, again, there's a whole section on cluster development that was thrown in there in the 80s when that was popular, which doesn't have a lot of foundation to it as to make it really workable. And that's what we heard from both developers and even the local surveyor in town, who's also a sewer commissioner, said he just never had a client who could reasonably assume that they could get some kind of cluster development in. So that was another component for the planning board to say, well, we put this on our agenda to kind of continue the work. Again, the grant will get you started, but as you know, it's a long-term investment in time and putting something in and see the results. And if you really think that you've put in something that's totally unattainable, then you have to revisit it again. So right now, again, cluster development is something that the planning board is looking at, and actually Sandwich kind of went backwards in that, having done the audit and gotten some of these amendments to the zoning ordinance, we're now going back to look at our master plan. It was finalized in 2011, so it's really past time to once again revisit that and get more stuff into the master plan that will support greater effort to expand some of the housing opportunities, whether it's eventually maybe changing some of the lot minimum sizes or whatever else.
Susan, I had one question. Do you know how many second homes are there in Sandwich, or are there a lot of, you said some people came back and that had second homes to live there. Are there a lot of second homes in Sandwich?
Yeah, it's on Swan Lake, so, I think the pie chart showed about 34% is vacant some of the time, meaning that they're mostly seasonal. And again, some of them have changed over to full-time as people retired, especially around COVID. But again, it was a lake vacation community.
Right,
and,
so it's, yeah, it sounds like a
so-
third of the town then, a third of the town might be seasonal.
Excuse me?
It sounds like a third, maybe 1/3 of the town is seasonal homes.
Yeah, that's usually the case, and again,
Yeah.
the one other thing, again, when you start having, forums and people start talking about housing, one of the other thing that came to the forefront that is a concern for some people are short-term rentals and how that may impact your housing stock for full-time owners or renters.
Right. The other thing I was reading when I was looking at all of this, it said the median house price in 2023 was 624,500. Does that sound right? I mean,
Yeah,
it sounds really high.
There was
I mean,
one on the market at the time we were working on this that was 640,000 in what most people would consider a starter home that was stuck in the 80s. I mean, that's not a starter home for a lot of people.
No. No. Well, it sounds like there's a lot of expensive houses in Sandwich, yeah.
Tim, are you done with your questions?
Yes.
Okay. Hi Susan, thank you so much. This is Vicky on the planning board. So one question, what was the value of your housing opportunity grant? How much did you apply for, and did the town need to provide a local match?
No, it was, we asked for 32,000 for this one, and it was tight too, because every once in a while, Will would enthusiastically say he could do something, and then we would get an email from his boss to say, well, it wasn't part of the contract. Which helped, again, like with the survey, they didn't actually work on the survey, they gave us some samples from other towns, and it was actually our town administrator, Courtney Delaney, who really kicked it into what we needed and did all the when it came back, she did all the data collection and the pie charts for the results and everything else. So
Wow. A
up
lot of
front,
work.
you really have to consider when you're hiring the consultant, really go over what the scope of their work is going to be.
And so you said that for $32,000 that your consultant gave you some surveys, samples that you could use, and then ran 2 public forums, and then did the assessment of barriers that were in your regulations, and then drafted zoning amendments? Are those like the 4 main deliverables, or did I miss something?
No, that was pretty much it. So we really felt we had to focus on that audit, because as I say, that professional outside view of like what is all this stuff in here that you know, why are you making it so difficult for somebody even in the village district to divide their giant house into two family without them saying that, oh no, you have to double the lot size in order to
Right.
do that.
Right. And so did you feel like, can you tell me what the kind of themes were for the 2 workshops?
Well, the first one was that he had, and I could send you the presentation that he
Mhm.
provided for us. I can do that as a follow-up.
Okay,
But he really went through the audit, like step by step, and identified what was considered barriers, and then further said, after consulting with the planning board as to what the planning board really wanted to focus with, as far as the recommendations of what are we going to do about this.
mhm,
So there, again, they were fairly well attended. We did a Friday evening and then a Saturday morning to try to get as many people who could attend, and there were at least 40 or more in each of those forums, and a lot of questions, and some people, I took the photos of it, and then when Housing Academy asked, do you have any photographs, it was like, there were like a lot of pictures of really grumpy looking people, and trying to find one that somebody didn't have gray hair was.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with gray hair, come on, come on, come on. Okay, so the workshops focused on the assessment of your regulations. And then you got, then the consultant gave you amendments, and then, the planning board was in charge of presenting those amendments to the community and running those public hearings, is that correct?
Yeah, and we definitely scheduled two, whether or not there was going to be, I mean, you're only supposed to have a second one if there's significant amendments to what you've provided.
Yep.
But we decided that two were definitely needed to be done in any case, again, to get maximum turnout and a lot of dialogue about them.
Yep.
And
So did you?
and I know that you might have the same thing, but social media can be your friend and it can be the headache.
Right.
The sandwich board lit up, and there were a lot of comments, and every once in a while your head would want to explode with some of the misinformation.
Right.
But we really try to keep ahead of that.
Mhm.
And if you get a couple of people in your community that you know have that network and people trust them, and those are the people who speak out in favor of supporting what you are doing, it makes a world of difference. So know your community leaders, whether they're on a board or not. You've got to identify the ones that everybody listens to when they're having a cup of coffee at the local cafe.
Right, and I have one other question. So these changes were just adopted at March town meeting. Have you seen, like, results? Are people coming forward with more accessory dwelling unit proposals, and are you getting more units? Has there been a response?
In the ADU, which we had on our books from 2015 onward, we did expand on that. Detached are allowed. We expanded somewhat on the size requirements, and the one other sticking point with the ADUs was we originally said that it had to be owner occupied.
Yep.
That led to some people saying, well, I wanna rent out one, but I'm not always there, so can I don't know, Airbnb the other one. So the language was changed that they don't have to live there, but it has to be primarily used only by them. So that when they come up seasonally or something, that's where they stay. But we didn't want to get into the whole Airbnb thing, but we did loosen up some of the language in the size requirements and a few other things that made ADUs a little bit easier to do, and there have been a number of building permits, especially for some detached ones.
Okay, so, and that's been, would you say the detached ADU has been the most popular response to your zoning amendments?
Yeah, I think that seems to be the easiest one to approach first. Because I know at least even two of them were older people, and they wanted to put in the ADU for them to move into, and then they would rent out the larger house for a larger income.
Mhm. Got it, so they would essentially downsize into the new accessory dwelling unit and then rent out their house to, where they could get more income.
Right.
Yeah, and what about, of the builders and developers that you spoke with? Have they, started talking in a preliminary fashion to the planning board about, projects that they can, envision now that your ordinance has been changed?
Not really, a lot of the local builders, I mean, there's at least 3 or 4 of them, and they tend to, again, specialize in the higher end, single-family home. But they did have a lot of input as to what the market was like, what the building materials were like, what timelines were like. And the 2 major ones that we talked to was, as I said, Lakes Region Community Developers, which are a nonprofit. Both Carmen and Sal Hubbard came to 2 of our meetings to really talk about their process and what they look for. And Sandwich and some of these smaller communities that don't offer, again, municipal water and sewer are a hard slog for them. They're
Yeah.
working on one in Ashland and they're working on one in Wolfboro. And we talked to community, Commerce Properties LLC. He does a lot of these smaller bills. Again, I met him in Ashland where he has one going and another proposed one that tend to be smaller, but again, what makes it more feasible for him is the municipal water and sewer. So that is the biggest thing to overcome for any of these larger developments that look for workforce housing, or even senior housing. We have one senior housing, and it looks pathetic when you look at the chart of all these, all these towns. There are 10 units of senior living in Sandwich, and those were done in 80s, 90s. And again, we got 3 of the people who were involved in that effort to join our subcommittee in working on housing this time around.
Cool. So, in terms of, like, the town trying to partner with, a workforce housing provider or a subsidized housing provider, is that, something that you feel the zoning has facilitated or made that conversation, the outcome more possible?
I think with the incremental step we had taken already, it hasn't really set the table for them so much. I think the next step for the planning board is to really address cluster development and go back to some of the conversations that were done years ago with conservation groups about having combined conservation land and affordable housing in some sort of mix that makes sense, that you can still conserve a lot of land and still have the kind of housing that you want to support.
Got it. Okay, I've taken a lot of your time, here's Hebe.
Hi there, my name's Hebe Quinton. This is lovely to see this stuff. I'm really impressed with all the work Sandwich has done. I feel like you've boldly gone into the future. I did wonder, what is the source of information that you have for your housing inventory? How do you know that a third of your houses are second homes? Is there something in the ordinance that taxes them differently, or is there, where do you get that information? Because I don't think that we know.
Well, if you could ask the tax collector, when she does a sort, she can tell you how many tax bills go to other addresses as the main address for any kind of property owner.
Oh, interesting.
And with our avatar assessors, you can do a lot of different specialized sorts to find out what is vacant lots, what are homes that have been assessed as more or less seasonal.
Yes, I could see that. It was the second home part where, it's a fully functional winterized home. and just not occupied full-time. But I see that point about the out-of-town tax address, that's good thinking.
Yeah, and she knows too with car registrations and voter registrations, so she has a good sense of the percentage of people who are only in town part-time.
Cool, thank you very much.
Okay, yep.
Hi Susan, this is Rich Mengy. One of the graphs that we saw in, or that I see in a handout that Barrett had for a November meeting, talks about the demographics of Sandwich. I think you answered my question, but in 2015, the population was around 1,300, and in 2021, it was over 1,700. You know, we had COVID in 2020, so did you say that, or would you say that most of those are from the second home owners moving into Sandwich, or was there some development that occurred in that 6-year period?
Well, there is one just major subdivision, which was slowly but surely selling, and that too is only, I think, less than 20 lots. So again, if you go to the selectman's office and you ask for what the building permits reflected in the way of how many new houses were built and how many were just renovated, you can get an idea of how many were brand new versus how many were winterizing to become full-time homes. And even Will said those numbers that come from the 2 or 3 census that he looked at have a variable of up to 20% or something. So the 1,700 is a little hard to pin down.
Okay. But it doesn't sound like there was a tremendous amount of development in town between those two periods, that 6 years. It's just that more people moved into their second homes, and whether or not they're still there, somebody would have to, do a data search.
Right.
But, okay, that was just something that stuck out in my mind, like, what's going on there? Population gain of 400 people, is a lot. Also, you mentioned about moving incrementally, but I was wondering if you could pull up the slide that you had about the zoning amendments that you had, because I think you said you had 10 zoning amendments. So there we go. So 4 of them were to amend definitions. 2 were to amend ADU requirements. You mentioned something about increasing the size of the ADU. Do you recall how large it was and how large you went up to?
Well, we ended up, I think, doing a percentage. Like if you already have a really large house, then your ADU could be, it always had to be, again, as an accessory, it always has to be less in size than the primary structure. But
Yeah.
part of it was, well, why are we telling people how much square footage they can live in? The RSA for ADU says you cannot mandate less than 750 square feet. That doesn't mean people don't want to do smaller ones, but you can't put it in your regulations to have it smaller than that. But we went the other way and said, well, a certain percentage of the square footage of the livable floor space in an ADU could be, I forget the numbers now, but we based it on more on a percentage.
Okay, so a bigger house could support a larger ADU footprint
Yeah.
or square footage. Okay.
And a follow-on question to that, do you distinguish between attached ADUs and detached ADUs?
The question was, do you distinguish between attached and detached ADUs? are there different requirements for, square footage?
No, so the size would be the same in the way of square footage based on the primary residence. With the detached, we had that it can't be more than 300 feet away from the primary. Now, again, 2 of them have gone to the ZBA to challenge that. And they have to have a shared driveway, and the detached has to still meet all the other setbacks required in the zoning for livable structures.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead. Nat.
Yeah, Susan, I'm just wondering how the, both the ADUs and the, I assume most of the two families that, potential two families, would be conversions, not new builds. And so I'm wondering how the septic issue is solved. Because there's more bedrooms and some people are gonna now have too many for their current system.
Well, that's up to DES, cause even in the RSAs for ADUs, you can't require that they have a new septic system, but they have to prove that either their current one can support any additional bedrooms, or, so it is still based on what DES requires in the way of any kind of renovation. So even if you were adding a wing to your house because you're having more kids and you wanna add 3 more bedrooms, you still have to go through the DES process of having your septic system approved.
So we had heard, I guess, a couple of weeks ago, that part of that approval could be a plan for a new system, which is acceptable when the current one fails. Are people using that type of strategy?
Yeah, I guess certainly the detached ADUs that came through the zoning board, had gone through DES to have the paperwork to say that should their current one fail, or that their current one couldn't support further, that how they were going to address the septic issue.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that the state would allow you to have a system that wasn't up to par and let it fail. I mean, that doesn't make sense, really. I think we'd have to look into that a little bit more.
But it's hard for me to believe that there can be much progress made in terms of ADU. I mean, most of these septic systems are built for the house, specifically for the house. They don't have necessarily much margin. So if you add an ADU, or you convert to a 2-family, there's gonna be a change in bedroom. So that means that every single one of these is going to have to build a new separate system or expand the existing one.
Well, so,
And the other problem is that you have to prove that your system is adequate. And as David Robbins says, very few people, they don't have records of these systems. So if you don't have a record,
Yeah, then you're guilty.
then you have to
anyway.
do it anyway, you know.
Right.
So it's hard to have, records aren't there.
I think, Nat, to speak to your point though, a lot of these septic systems, especially in older homes, were designed back when we had 5-gallon flushes and, just in a world where water conservation was not any kind of a consideration. And I don't know. I think that would be an interesting question to ask somebody that it does, but I suspect that there is spare capacity simply because we're using less water.
Well, see, I
I
think
don't know,
it's
I've
based on
never
solids though.
I've never heard
It's not
anybody
based on water,
told,
it's based on the
hey,
solids.
actually, you can.
So, that's a good question, but I guess for, our question for Susan is that you rely strictly on, in approving these things, you rely on the DES to say, yes,
Right.
there's a septic system here, it'll support it, and that you don't have any further concerns. Is that a fair way to summarize?
Yeah, well, cause with residential, planning boards don't look at residential anyway, so it would be up to your building inspector or your compliance officer when they're going to issue a building permit, that if there's any question that there's septic systems involved, then they require something from DES. And I had a long conversation with the guy from DES about how they set their gallons per day, and he said that it's worked for decades and they're not going to change the formula, but you can't second guess, like a house with 4 bedrooms, not all of them occupied, or they're occupied with teenagers who spend the day in a shower. And whether or not you add a second kitchen, how much water that actually increases the outflow. He said, so far, they haven't had very few issues with what their formula is based on for gallons per day, dependent on the number of bedrooms being used.
Okay, thank you.
Any board member have another question? I'd like to see if anybody who's participating in the Zoom call has a question for Susan. I think we can probably just go directly to voice, or people could type in their question on the chat.
There is a question in the chat.
Is there a question in the chat?
There you go, see the red?
Got it. Here's the chat.
So it looks like those were just items
Yeah.
before we got started.
Well,
There's some helpful stuff. Sorry, Jennifer, we didn't get to this before. I wonder if I should do that now.
yes,
Select.
maybe you should just read it out, Vicky, and,
There's a new message, let's see.
oh, I see,
Yeah, so there's some,
that's,
do we vote as a town on hiring the consultant? The answer to that is no. No, that would be, up to the planning board would be hiring the consultant, though, since the planning board doesn't have any money, the select board would have to approve the contract. Well, if we get all, I mean, we, I guess, have to apply for a grant, and then, the planning board would be hiring the consultant, so, if we got the grant money. But
Yeah,
we-
the HOP provided a list of approved consultants, and the last time around, you pretty much had to pick from their list. This next round with the HOP grant, they said if you found some other consultant, they would vet them to say whether or not they would approve spending money on them. Again, a lot of, especially working on your master plan or something, a lot of towns went with their regional planning commission as the consultant.
Yep. That's what Hanover did, you know, cause it's easy, they've got so much information at their fingertips and they know the housing market, so that's easy if they have the time.
So how do we provide the opportunity for participants to?
Well, if they, we
They
have
would
to-
have to,
if they can type in, or I think if they just
Just
put on their
unmute.
video and put on their mic, they can actually ask.
Just unmute themselves.
Yes. So if they unmute and then they can speak, but if they unmute and turn on their video, then we can see them, they can wave their hands.
so do we have any questions from the public? This would be an opportunity to ask Susan.
Okay, Elena's question I think has been answered, and some people are just, well, we're happy that people are here just to hear about the conversation, because it gets you in the mindset about what we need to think about to bring more housing opportunity to Lyme. Okay, so.
Yeah, the second round of grants the deadline was September 30th, so you might have to wait for round 3.
Right.
Um,
So Lenore asked, when is the HOP grant due? It's a great question. And I guess we need to get our ducks in line to, for next year. And maybe we can shortcut and go immediately to, by doing some of the survey work ourselves, maybe working with the Regional Planning Commission to, get the audit done. If we wanted to apply to somebody different to do the audit.
Maybe we could steal Sandwich's survey.
Well,
I'd love to see it.
some of
Crib-
those, yeah.
Crib from the best,
Oh,
you
it's
know?
there, I sent it to you. I sent it to you.
There's never any reason to reinvent the wheel. Having worked in land use offices for a long time, it's like, well, what other towns have written these things? And you look for towns that are successful in what they've done and use them as a model. You don't have to kind of always start from scratch yourself.
Good.
Yeah, although I think some of our regulations to start were looser than what Sandwich was starting with. So we already have attached and detached ADUs, that type of thing, so, for us, our barriers might be a little different, and so we would wanna focus conversation on what we perceive our barriers to be and what the, kind of appetite of the town is for, changing those things.
Yeah. Because certainly, Sandwich, not that it's in the middle of nowhere, but it's at least half an hour from any of the major highways, especially the ones north and south. I mean, we're on Route 25.
Yep.
And.
Yep.
But it doesn't bring in, again, when people even, one of the things that recently came up was, the local restaurant asking about whether he could put in EV chargers. And it's like he was ambitious about, there's grant money out for that too, and it's like, well, the providers for those, especially Tesla, looks at, where's the high traffic areas?
Right, volume, yeah.
We wanna put in 8 to 10 chargers on a heavily traveled highway, you're not there. So.
Yeah.
And our employment base, they're considered as far away as Plymouth, Laconia, Conway. So anybody who lives in Sandwich, other than our biggest employers, which is the school and the town itself, everybody has to travel. And again, having been one of the first towns with high-speed broadband, that helps bring people in who can work from home virtually, which for some may make a big difference. But then again, the housing costs in this particular town is also still a barrier, and I'm not sure how we can cope with that, so.
Just throwing this, has the planning board said, oh, well, we're going to address the housing need that the Regional Planning Commission identified in this way, hoping to get X number of units with ADUs, or X number of units through a workforce housing project, or have you sorted that out? There's obviously organic growth that, people are gonna build new homes. Have you looked at that kind of challenge in any kind of strategic way in setting goals for how to achieve that, what seems like a large number? It's a large number for Lyme.
Well, as I say, the planning board was a little bit sidetracked this year. They had embarked on working on cluster development and looking at short-term rentals and what the actual impact is, because again, most of it is either hearsay or, again, we're not in a high market like Conway has been suffering with it. But they got sidetracked with trying to get some regulation in for solar energy systems.
It
for
took us 2
this
years,
go-round.
so I get it. Yeah.
So something always comes up, and again, maybe that ends up being tied in, because going back to looking at our master plan and starting to look at that, the HOP grant that we have applied for a second round, to once again go back to the master plan and really address vision, land use, the housing, and the demographics. But none of them stand alone. You can't talk about housing without talking about your employment base and about even your transportation, or all the things that really tie in, and how getting more people to move to town impacts your infrastructure and your services.
Yeah.
So going back to a master plan really brings a lot of that into focus. So that's what the planning board is really starting on right now, is whether or not they get the grant money for those particular chapters. They're committed to starting to really look at the master plan again. So I don't know how old yours is, but we're going on year 13 or 14 that this thing was written, and it's time to really look at it again.
Yeah, well, that's how we came to these forums, was in hoping to rewrite a housing chapter. We don't really have one that's embedded in our land use chapter, so it's writing a housing chapter and trying to understand what the community would like to see to address, the needs that have been identified for our community. But, I mean, in my way of thinking, it'd be kind of cool to also have a parallel project going on at the same time that we're writing a housing chapter. 'Cause time's just going on, and we have 3 restaurants in town, and one's closed right now because they don't have staff, and another one has very limited hours, and just like 5 years ago, they used to be open for breakfast and have pastries, and, now that's not the case, so it's, a matter of staffing, not really demand. And we don't wanna see those businesses, not be in our community. So we'd like to have more housing to make it easier for them to staff their businesses.
Yeah, and I know larger towns are doing that. I know there's like Dover, again, it's a huge
Yeah.
employment base.
Yeah.
And some of the companies are starting to do just that. They're building housing for their staff
Right,
because they,
well, the restaurants here in this town wouldn't be doing that, but,
right?
and we don't have water or sewer either, but, we provide, we're easy commuting distance to both the college and to Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center, the VA hospital, and the postal service has a big sorting center in White River, so there's some major employers, and we're within easy commuting distance, so there, people, like that would like to live in Lyme, as well as, for our local businesses. So, I mean, our goal with this is to have a housing chapter that's reflective of, our community's vision, but in the meantime, it'd be nice to also have something, happening to create some more housing, too, so.
And I guess you have to start thinking outside the box. I guess everybody keeps thinking of building all these things, and my personal story is when we first came to New Hampshire and were renting, and started going to the food co-op in Concord, and met up with people who wanted to do a housing cooperative.
Mhm.
And our first housing that we could buy was buying into a housing cooperative.
Mhm.
And so the 4 couples bought an old farm with 42 acres and made it in limited equity, so that if you were going to buy your way out, you could not make a huge profit on selling whatever the market value was, but to get your equity back when you left and allow somebody else to afford to come into it. And it worked well for almost about 16 years.
Wow.
But there are other ways. I mean, again, and yes, we had to put in a new septic system to support, because again, DES approved a wonderful plan for a septic system that just was never installed.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. Interesting.
Were there any other comments in the chat there, Vicki?
No.
There's something about a Rusty's comment?
Rusty was just saying it was great.
Oh,
Rusty's
okay.
interested in being, there are a couple of people who just said, I don't have comments, but I really am enjoying the conversation. So, yeah,
Okay.
yep, and we're happy to have people just viewing and enjoying the conversation, so that is totally fine, because we're all gonna be talking about, our housing chapter and vision for the future of housing in Lyme, as well as zoning amendments at some point, so it's good that we're all in it together.
yeah, and that's really important, again, the outreach, because master plans are based on reaching out to your community for what the community's vision is, not what you're going to write for them. And again, the more you can do that and get community buy-in,
Mm-hmm.
and again, if you don't have a whole lot of money, then, and you're really relying heavily on volunteer effort, then you've gotta get people to really buy into what you're doing.
Yep. Yeah,
So find leaders.
Yeah, one of the things that we kind of came with from our last forum was that many people were interested in having accessory dwelling units, because their homes were too big for them alone, but, you know, didn't really know where to start. So, I mean, it's not really a regulatory thing as much as providing assistance for them to figure out if their septic system is big enough, and, you know, what are the steps to creating a second unit at their homes, and, which our regulations would already allow. So it may be that it's a different kind of thing that would, not just be a regulatory change, but that we need a funding mechanism to assist people to do that, because they don't have the wherewithal, to create this second unit on their property.
Right. And sometimes creating a second unit, you're converting what would have been, out of your 4 bedrooms, you're taking 2 bedrooms and you're making
Right.
it 1 bedroom and a living room and another kitchen, so
Exactly,
it's not as impactful to the septic system as you might think, as to what you're adding, but what you're also converting.
right. Yep.
Right.
Actually, I just realized I had a question, Susan. What are the requirements in the zoning for multi-unit housing? Is it allowed? What kinds of restrictions are there on that? Is it allowed in various, yeah.
Are you able to hear the
I'm
question,
sorry, let me
Susan?
start again. Restrictions on multi-unit housing, are you, what parts of town is it permitted in? Are there limits on size or units or anything like that?
No, the multi-unit, as I said, we teased out that 2 units don't qualify as the multi-unit anymore. So 3 to 5 units are what's in the zoning at the moment. And with that, where the minimum lot size for a single family is about 2 1/4 acres, it's a little over 4 for a multi-unit. And it's almost treated at that point like commercial, because now it has to have a larger setback that includes a buffer. So that's something else we have to kind of start looking at as to why it's so onerous to have 3 to 5 units somewhere that, but they are allowed in the rural residential district, the village district, which probably won't happen because the village is rather smaller lots to begin with. And they're not allowed in the shoreline.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Right. I think, if there are no further questions, I think we could say goodbye, and thank you so much for being willing to meet with us and with some members of our community, Susan. It was very interesting to see what you've been doing over there, and frankly, it's quite daunting for me to consider to think that you got a grant and went to the town in what appears to be less than 6 months starting, so your community did a lot of work, it sounds like, and it's to be congratulated, I think. So thank you very much.
Yes,
and,
thank you.
Yeah, and we have one question here. Elena asked, was this meeting recorded? And the answer is yes, if David Robbins set it up that way. So I believe he did, that was the intention.
Very good.
And Rich is recording it.
I'm recording
Yeah,
as well,
yes, so
yes.
the answer is yes, we might have two recordings.
We can have
but-
stereo.
Yeah.
Very good. Well, thank you
It
very,
was a pleasure meeting you all, and I hope you.
Thank you so much, Susan.
Do well in your, whatever you embark on, but yes.
We're trying our best. Good
Yeah,
night, Lynn.
Good night, all.
just make sure that you include your community every step of the way, and get your major supporters
Good night, Rusty.
very
to
good.
do a lot of your work for you.
Good night, John Boy.
Thank you.
All right. Good night. So
Good night, Elizabeth.
we'll keep the Zoom going.
Yeah,
because
yeah,
you
might as
got the
well,
meeting
because,
still.
yeah, we're still having
Yeah.
our meeting, so anyone who wants to can stay with us.
Okay. Well, I thought that was quite helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Nat, for setting that up.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That was as good as I could have hoped it
yeah,
would be. Yeah.
that's what I was hoping it would be too.
So it's interesting, when I look at this information, they have a phase two report, I was wondering what happened to phase one, and they never did phase one.
Right.
Correct.
They jumped right into phase two as
Great, yep.
Right,
their
Well,
initial.
phase one is right, the housing chapter, isn't it?
right,
Yes.
that master plan.
Master
So-
plan.
So they're doing it the other way
Yeah,
around.
yeah.
I did find on the website, the warrant articles, the 10 that they,
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
so,
And,
But there's
and one
a-
of her
it's-
slides
yeah.
did show that.
Right, it's
I'm sure it's,
right.
it's probably much
Right.
easier to read online.
But it's specific for their zoning.
course,
which
but
I
I
think
would-
ours is already more lenient than that.
well, I would just thought it would be interesting to see
Yeah,
specific
yeah,
things that
yeah,
they
yeah.
recommended.
Well, how, would our ADU, ordinance differ from theirs?
Yes,
Yeah.
How does it differ?
cause we didn't need to
Size.
double the size of the lot to put a second unit on. That's, immediately.
And is it the
Right.
750 square feet, is that a minimum or a
It's a
maximum?
max.
It's a maximum.
So,
Yeah.
For
so is that,
ours.
is that an issue?
Well,
Yes.
ours is a percentage, theirs is a percentage and ours is a flat, 750.
Right.
But their minimum is 750.
Their minimum is 750.
Yeah,
The
I think you could get permitted for less than that.
No, no, no.
No,
The
the
RSA
RSA is
doesn't allow you
750.
to mandate less than 750.
Right.
But if
People-
somebody proposed something less than seven
They can
fifty,
do it.
Oh, yeah,
you
you
wouldn't
can
turn them
build it.
down.
No, they can do it.
Yeah,
I think, Nat, so far, it hasn't been an issue, as far as I'm talking to David and whatever, as far as somebody wanting to build an ADU that's bigger than that, but it could be in the future. In other words, so far in town, we've had such.
No one has come
No.
forward asking
Right.
for a bigger ADU.
Right.
Yeah, the 750 is pretty small. If you're, two people. If you're a family, it's really small.
Yeah, I think we could think about raising that.
Right.
Or we've talked about that, raising it.
Right.
But it has to be smaller than the main house.
And then I thought what they did with the single-family conversion to a duplex was interesting. And do we have duplexes allowed? It seems to me we
Yes.
do not.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
We do.
Because, you
Yeah.
can convert an existing building into up to 6 units. So,
Right,
2 is fewer than 6.
yeah, so that's easy to
Right.
do. I think the problem they had was that the duplex was thrown in with the 3 to 5, so that,
It was considered
made it more-
multifamily.
yeah, it made it
Yeah.
more onerous to build the two-family.
But the conversion would be the same for them as it is for us. Because I think they were focusing more on conversions.
Well, Lyme is, Lyme's ordinance with the conversion language, I understand is fairly unusual.
What is the language?
That you can convert an existing building into up to 6 units. That's not, some of the lawyers I've spoken to say that, I've never seen that before. And so, we make it easy to make a duplex or a triplex out of an existing building.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, you could take any house in Lyme and.
But
Convert it.
if you wanted to start from scratch, do we allow duplexes?
No.
No.
No,
Well, we would allow a duplex because it would be a primary and an accessory.
And an ADU, yeah.
But,
Anything bigger than
3 or
2.
more,
Right.
you can't start from scratch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Is effective.
what do people wanna talk about? I think we need to address the minutes.
yep,
And then just to reiterate what our schedule is for our next 2 meetings, cause I think it's our next meeting.
November 7th.
7.
And that's the regular,
That's Twin Pines,
yeah, and that's an additional meeting that
That's
we do.
additional.
instead of Thanksgiving.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
And Jonah's coming,
14.
The 14th, as well as
Great.
Jamie Rogers from
great.
Mark.
So, Rich, you've been in touch with Twin Pines. Can you
I
do
will
a follow-up
confirm
with
him,
them?
yes.
And make sure that he's still willing to come or able to come? And if he needs if he's gonna do anything IT-wise.
I mean, I imagine,
he'll
well, I don't know
probably-
if he'll be here in person. Actually, I think he will. I think that was his expectation.
Great,
And if he's got a presentation, we can show it on the big screen and
yeah,
magic will happen.
yeah, that'll be great.
Yep.
Well,
So-
David will be here, so we're gonna.
And David will be here, so we'll all be off the hook.
Well, the main thing was connecting with Susan, so
Yes.
you're able to do that,
Yay,
and,
thank you, Vicky.
I don't,
Good job.
I
Yeah, it
don't,
was fine, Vicky.
there's nothing, I mean,
Yeah,
I don't
right.
understand what didn't happen with the owl, but,
Right,
oh well.
I didn't have a chance to speak sternly to it, but.
So we have the minutes from October 10th, and I don't have a copy, but it looks like Rich Brown made some suggestions on the name
Right.
changes, or not, the correct spelling of the people
Right.
that were,
So there were
Here.
several misspelled names
Oh,
in
really,
the,
in there?
in the members of the public. So, yes, I mean, that, I'm pretty sure they're correct. I guess I'd like to note that there were 25 or 28
We had-
people.
We had looks like a total of about 50 people.
Yeah. I
so
mean,
it seems like we
on
should
Zoom.
perhaps list the people that attended by Zoom, or at least make mention of the fact that there were X number of
I think
Zoom
that,
participants.
that there's strong attendance, certainly over 25,
Yeah.
attending by
Yeah,
Zoom.
and tonight there were 9, you said? I'll put that.
Right.
Okay, so I know that there were, I think 11 at one point.
Okay.
Um, Why don't I write down the names that I got down, and you had Maureen Byrne here present,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
I didn't
She,
get it.
okay,
Yeah.
and then I'll write down.
Which, by the way, I asked
BYRNE.
Tim to take minutes for
Okay.
this meeting.
BYRNE, Maureen Byrne, and then I'll write down, who else, I saw online.
Okay, yeah, that'd be good.
Lenore, Elena Marshall,
Yep,
Lynn Brown.
yep, got her.
Rusty Keith.
Yep,
Jackie Mengy.
yep. All the supporting spouses.
All the supportive spouses.
Yeah, yeah.
We'll find out how well we did when we get home.
It looked like Bill Malcolm was on.
Oh,
He
and
was
Bill
here,
Malcolm,
yeah,
yes.
yep.
Bill Mel.
Okay, I've got, so I have Elena Marshall, Jackie Mengy, Lynn Brown, Rusty Keith, Lenore Bolton, Lynn Parshall.
Lynn.
There are more than that.
Bill
But-
Malcolm.
met Bill Malcolm, but I'll give this list to.
So, to the minutes from last time, do we just wanna say there was a strong presence
Thanks.
of over 25 people? You know, I mean, if we aren't able to drag their names out of our memories or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, or
You
maybe
could
we
say
could
at
ask
least
David
25.
to just pull the, I mean,
I-
did he record that on Zoom or?
He may well have, I mean, I'm sure he did, yes,
Okay,
so.
cause I would be happy to allow him to fill in that number.
You could certainly say, David, you can put in
Whatever,
you know,
right.
and we would accept it. And then the final comment that I had on the minutes was, that we referred to a number of documents there, and, I think it would be a good service to people in town to be able to, give them links to those documents.
Mhm.
And, you know, I think Renee Thiel's presentation is especially timely. I mean, this is what she was saying. There were other documents there about the regional housing needs assessment, innovative land use controls and stuff like that. And I did send those to David, and then David had the observation that, well, links go bad after a while. And I guess I have two thoughts on that. One is, well, it's a service right now for anybody in town that would care to follow up and actually read some of this source data. And even if those links
That's what updating websites is all
rotted,
about.
3 or 5 years from now, that's less of a concern. And the second is, if we were worried about that, we could also find a way to make space on the town website for documents that we think might be evanescent, like Renee's presentation, like, I mean, the regional housing needs assessment's not gonna disappear.
Yes.
So,
I
that's
understand.
my thought.
Yeah, I understand your thought, and I haven't talked to David about it, and he may not like this idea, but I think along those lines, I wonder if it is more appropriate to put something like that on, in the town, you know, in the planning board area of the website as,
Sure.
you know, resource.
I think it's a great idea.
I like it.
Thing, and that way it's a little clear and, and it's there, it's a
Mhm.
resource. You know, again, I haven't talked to David to
Right.
find out whether that's
Right.
something that he's gonna discourage us from or not. I think in terms of her presentation, I think we need to get her approval before we start posting
Absolutely,
that.
by all means, but my expectation is,
She would probably.
well, first off, it's kind of a public document.
Yeah,
It's
I
been
don't-
seen by all of us, members of a public
Right.
body, and oh, by the way, 50 residents of town, so. We should clearly ask her permission. I can't imagine.
I suspect she's not
That
gonna have an
she
issue
would have any
with
concern.
allowing us to do that.
So, Rich, what's it, to get a permission to put the link on, you mean, to the
Yeah,
regional
to allow
planning
us to
commission?
post it publicly. I mean, it's her private property, really. I mean, she brought it to a meeting, she shared it with those of us here, but
So it's the
to
regional-
actually put it on our website, I think,
I
Yeah.
think you're exactly correct. To ask her permission,
Yeah.
I can't imagine any circumstance. I mean, first off, she works for a body that we pay money to
Right.
produce this information, so.
right.
But, yes, we should absolutely ask.
Yeah.
So if you're curious about the attendance for the minutes from the meeting, it was 19 people in person, 26 Zoom links.
For the last meeting.
For the minutes.
For the minutes,
To put into the.
to put in the minutes
and the
from last meeting.
amending the minutes from last time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, what somebody should do is mark up the
19.
minutes and give them in, you know, physically to David, because Tim shouldn't have to enumerate every amendment in
No.
these minutes. Somebody have a hard copy?
I do.
Okay, can you
That's,
mark that up for him, just so that,
Oh,
it's cumbersome for Tim to
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
make,
I'll,
these were the changes to the
I've got it,
minutes.
so I've got these members, I've said C. Rich Brown's name for for spelling corrections,
Yeah,
and, add plus 26 Zoom participants.
19 in person and 26 Zoom. And some of them were twofers.
Right.
what do you mean two for, of the people on
Husband and
Zoom,
wife
yes.
sitting together.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, but we have all the 19 people listed, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Presumably.
Did you have any other issues with the minutes?
no, no.
I didn't.
Should we move to pass them?
Okay, as amended, do we have a second? Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? None. So, that's it.
Yep,
Sweet.
you did
Good
it.
job, everybody, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you especially Vicky for coming in
Uh,
early.
Trying
Yeah,
to
thanks.
make
And
this work.
meeting with David.
I mean, we were 75% there, so.
It's a good find, Nat.
And,
This was a good find.
yeah, of course,
Good work.
We're
terrific.
leaving, goodbye, anybody who's still on?
Yes,
Thank you.
I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
so moved.
You know, it's interesting, she said that about the HOP grants. I have not seen any, any town that hasn't used Barrett.
Oh, is that right?
And I've seen probably
Hanover-
4 or 5 towns.
Hanover hasn't used Barrett.
Yeah, you used the
Well,
regional.
not me, I live here.
Or
but
Hanover used the
Hanover used
regional
the
planning.
commission, yeah.
Right,
And you were unhappy with them.
No, I was happy with them. It's our master plan consultant
Oh, I
that
see.
was like, Vanessa Hengen, was bad.
Ooh,
That's too
ooh,
bad.
not just, not optimal.
so who did you use for your master plan consultants?
Vanessa Hengen,
That's a company?
a company.
Yeah.
And that was something different than a HOP grant. And HOP, actually, we used the Regional Planning Commission for part of it, and then Opticos, who are the missing middle people. And so we had them do the barrier assessment in Hanover about, so, for missing middle. So they, and, you know, I wouldn't wanna argue about them, I think they're very competent. They actually, it was pretty interesting because they looked at the economic feasibility of building housing in places like West Wheelock Street and, you know, how that could happen. And so they did